Hello, fellow readers and booktubers, and welcome to the Roman Emperor's Reading Challenge. And this post and the post that will follow it deal with the second of the Roman emperors, Tiberius, the son of Augustus, who was the first of the Roman emperors. And by the way, speaking of Rome, before I go any further, this is in the Roman Catholic Church. I'm recording this on Ash Wednesday, the beginning of the 40-day observance of Lent. And in the Catholic Church on Ash Wednesday, you go to church and get your ashes. So in case any of you are rushing to your keyboards to comment that I have a smudge on my forehead, that's not a smudge. It's not a smudge. But we'll leave it at that. A little religious observation for the day. So anyway, the Emperor Tiberius. Now, for those of you who read a biography of Augustus to kick off this Roman Emperor's Reading Challenge, you would have already encountered the character of Tiberius. He shows up quite a bit during the reign of Augustus as a central figure and even kind of a tragic figure. And with the death of Augustus, Tiberius then becomes the next emperor. He essentially inherits the office. Although when he becomes emperor, he's already well into his 50s, which even by today's standards, that's considered a middle age. And in Roman standards, it's a little almost beyond middle age. And there is this sense that Tiberius becomes emperor, a man with complete and absolute power over the Roman Empire, too old to enjoy it. And there is a sense of bitterness and resentment when you study the life of Tiberius, especially when he becomes emperor. The years leading up to his time as emperor begin fairly well, and then he's just not popular with the people. And at one point, he actually retires from the political arena, which upset his father, Augustus, a great deal. He was very much victimized by imperial politics and dynastic politics. He was forced to divorce his wife, whom he greatly loved, Vipsania, and then he had to marry Julia, the reckless and irresponsible daughter of Augustus. And so he greatly resented these things. And finally, when he becomes emperor, his reign is just marked by a lot of dissension. He does not have that personal touch that his famous father Augustus had. And he doesn't have that political acumen. He's not beloved by the people. The people come to hate him and resent him as much as he resents them. And quite often in the political arena then, as today, if you are an unpopular politician, all kinds of strange rumors begin to swirl around you, and this was certainly true of Tiberius as well, and he dies in horrific infamy. So it is very much a tragic story. Some of the tragedy, perhaps he brought on himself, but he's a complex individual and a very interesting one, and he was the second emperor of Rome. So for this is the first of two parts I'm going to do on Tiberius. Part two, I'll talk more about his life and his reign as emperor. But in this part one, I just want to recommend a few books. Now, some of these books I already mentioned at the conclusion of my post on the Emperor Augustus. So I'm kind of repeating myself here in case you missed that. I want to restate some of these titles. And there's also a couple of titles that I neglected to mention last time. The main book that I'll be reading in this reading challenge is Robin Seager's Tiberius. Seager was wonderful, or is a wonderful Roman historian, and he writes his very straightforward narrative accounts with a lot of depth and insight as well of various Roman emperors and other individuals from Roman history. But this is his biography of Tiberius. It's still available. It's very, very well done, very, very interesting. So I would recommend this. This will be the core book for my reading challenge, but there are other really good biographies of Tiberius as well. This one is called The Successor by VanDijk. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name correctly. This one, for those of you who want kind of a quick, concise biography of Tiberius, this one does the job magnificently. It's not very long, but it's very insightful, very succinct. It gives you all the major events and interpretations of those events. It's just called The Successor. Again, I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce the historian's name. I think he's Dutch. I'm not even that familiar with him. Yeah, he's Dutch. Willemijn VanDijk. I don't know. This is a translation, of course. But again, it's very succinct, it's very brief, but it's really good. And then we've got Barbara Levick, a very, very famous Roman historian, Tiberius the Politician. This is a more academic work and focusing on one aspect of Tiberius's reign. Levick, great historian, really, really insightful, goes into a great deal of depth, whatever the topic is that she's writing on. This is perhaps not for a broad general audience, but I would say if you read the biography of Augustus, you've got a pretty good background now in Roman history in the early imperial period, and so you may not be you may not hold a college degree in Roman history, but if you've read Augustus, you can handle this. Of course you can, but do be forewarned that it is the focus is much tighter, and Levick assumes that you know certain things about Roman politics in the first century of the Common Era. But it's very good as far as Tiberius is concerned. A more recent Tiberius and his age, I can't speak for this one, Edward Champlin. This is a much more recent work. It bills itself as a revisionist history. Not sure why. Sometimes revisionist histories can be very, very good and very necessary. Other times they're written more for sensationalism. I don't want to say any more about this. I really don't know about this book. I'm sure it's wonderful. But again, it seems very brief, right? Not too many pages here. A lot of biographies of Tiberius that focus exclusively on his reign are going to be brief. He was only emperor for a little over 20 years. And, the better part of his life, the more interesting part of his life was actually before he became emperor. But when it covers his years as emperor, some interesting things happen. And certainly the way his life or his reign moves forward the story of what it means to be a Roman emperor, he's important in that regard. But in terms of a major historical work, there's not a lot there. Okay, so some of these biographies that deal just with Tiberius as emperor are going to be kind of brief but interesting. So this is kind of an example of that. Now, if you want to get really hardcore about this and go to the original sources, the Romans themselves, what do they have to say about Tiberius? There's a number of really interesting original sources. Historians call them the primary sources. But the two major ones are Suetonius, Lives of the 12 Caesars, and he gives us a biographical sketch of Tiberius. I should caution you that Suetonius he was a scandal monger. He loved telling scandalous stories and repeating rumors. He was writing his biography of Tiberius about 100 years after the fact. I've heard Suetonius described as the keyhole historian. In other words, he's always like peeking in behind the curtains and through the keyholes to get all the dirt and gossip that's available. And it's from Suetonius that we get some of the more salacious accounts of the life of Tiberius. An interesting read for sure, but not to be dismissed completely. Tiberius was not popular, and for a number of reasons. Suetonius recounts some of those. Others maybe a little suspect on what he's suggesting, but Suetonius' Lives of the 12 Caesars, and then perhaps the best of the original sources dealing with the Emperor Tiberius is the greatest of the Roman historians, Tacitus. Okay, and in his Annals of Imperial Rome, which is a magnificent treasure trove of information about Rome during the first century of the Common Era. Tacitus, we don't know much about him. He seems like he was a Roman senator. He certainly had access to some information long lost to us. He was no fan of the emperors. This work is not complete. It exists in fragments. But in fact, the largest fragment here are his chapters dealing with the reign of Tiberius. And what makes this aspect of Tacitus's history so noteworthy. In fact, one of the reasons Tacitus is considered the finest of the Roman historians is the way he deals with Tiberius. What he gives us is not simply a recounting of the major events in Tiberius's life and interesting little anecdotes. Tacitus does something very few ancient authors did. He digs deeper into Tiberius's personality, trying to untangle what we would regard as the psychological motives behind Tiberius's personality. There was no such thing as psychology back in the days of ancient Rome. And so, Tacitus inadvertently is creating a kind of a psychological profile of a Roman emperor. The only thing we have close to that, it comes from Tacitus and his life of Tiberius. So in the Roman Emperor's Reading Challenge, there's all these wonderful recent explorations of the life of Tiberius and his time as emperor and all that. But if you want to go back, if you want to get hardcore about this, read the original sources and read Tacitus. As a matter of fact, if you're interested in Roman history just in general, at some point you're going to have to read Tacitus. I strongly recommend Tacitus, the greatest of the great. He's kind of grumpy. He's very ironic in his attitudes. But as I said, shockingly modern in a lot of what he has to say. And what he has to say about Tiberius really informs a lot of modern historical research into Tiberius in a way that's really unexpected and quite deep. So Tacitus. So those are some recommended sources for information about the Emperor Tiberius. And so that's part one. And part two, I'll be posting that probably in another week or two. I just want to go over the high points of the life of Tiberius. And as I said, if you've already read the life of Augustus, you know a great deal about Tiberius's life before he became emperor. So in part two, I'd focus more on the history of Tiberius the emperor and what that was like and how he contributed to the concept of emperor among the Romans, which was still a new thing when Tiberius comes to power. This idea of an emperor. The Romans saw Tiberius continuing the role of Augustus as being a kind of generalissimo, protecting the people from a corrupt Senate. Rome had not at that time entirely accepted the idea of one-man rule. At any rate, that's what I've got for you now. Keep reading, and I'll talk to you all again very soon.